Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. And I should say that we have the return of Mark Gerson. I think was on with us a couple of years ago when he came out with a book called The Telling, How Judaism Essential Book Reveals the Meaning of Life. He's an entrepreneur, philanthropist, the co-founder of Gerson Learning Group, Africa Mission Healthcare, United Hatzalah of Israel, which I know he's very involved, but he also teaches Torah. He has a weekly class teaching Torah to Christians. He's also a Torah columnist for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
Zev, great to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you at the Jewish Center in Manhattan the other week. And as I told you, we're having you back because you came out when your book came out. So it was called The Telling. This is called The Retelling. But,
right.
So your book is interesting, dealing with different things, dealing for the holiday. I was just curious. A new poll has just come out showing that Americans are less religious, less patriotic, more into themselves. So I think perhaps the Haggadah, which is the best-selling book of all of them, and maybe your book, The Telling, maybe has some relevance to our new generation. Because were you surprised by the new findings?
I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. And I think your insight is as ever exactly right. I think one of the ways that we can start a really religious revival in the United States and among the Jewish people is through an appreciation of our great New Year's festival, which is Pesach. I mean, Pesach is not only the greatest Jewish holiday, I think it's the greatest holiday ever, because what is Pesach? It's our new year, and it gives us an opportunity to engage with family, with friends, and to really delve deeply into the great questions of our traditions in a night built for enjoyment. And when one experiences the Pesach Seder, one will have a great time, learn a lot, and leave with enduring lessons for the year ahead. And with that combination of joy and learning, it's the stuff of religious revival.
Now, what's interesting, the Torah, the Haggadah talks about four sons. You know, the Chacham, the smart son, the evil one, the one who can't ask, the simpleton. But there's one son that's missing, and that's one that doesn't show up to the Seder at all.
Right.
And
yeah, exactly.
In your book, you're trying to get that person who doesn't come, which I think is our biggest challenge in today's day and age.
Yeah, so we have the four sons, and in the book, I go through each of the four sons, and the idea behind the description of each of the four sons and each of the other chapters is to enable Seder goers to give their guests and their fellow Seder goers the most memorable, enjoyable, and instructive Jewish evening of the year. And there's so much to be learned from each of the four sons, which is often surprising to those who've been to Seders for years and years and just read through the Haggadah. But Zev, you're exactly right. The tragic son is not the wicked son, because the wicked son's there. And as long as the son is there, the leader of the Seder and the other Seder goers can extend a lifeline to him and can engage with them and can start or restart a relationship with him. The son that's the most difficult is the son who is not there. And that is why I think we open the door for Elijah. So when we open the door, what we're basically doing is welcoming, metaphorically, but welcoming the son who is not there and saying, hey, come back next year. You're always welcome here. This is your place. Whether you identify as the wicked son, the wise son, simple one who doesn't know how to talk, it doesn't matter. Your place is at the Seder.
Absolutely. And I think that's our biggest challenge, especially with the new reports that are coming out, that Americans are less religiously oriented. I know you also work with Christians. How did you get involved in giving a Dvar Torah on the Christian Broadcasting, now giving a Torah thought, and also you teach a class of Judaism to Christians? How did that all take place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I addressed some of this in the book, The Telling, when I said that we are all now living in a world historical moment. And that moment is of Jewish-Christian friendship. We Jews have been waiting for 4,000 years for friends like we have among evangelical Christians today. And this friendship is really very new. One can date it 40 years, one can date it 20 years, but it's flowering before our eyes. And every Jew and every Christian has the opportunity to participate in this great friendship. And I personally, my wife, who's a rabbi, we've had the opportunity, we've really been blessed to be able to participate in several ways. One is I chair African Mission Healthcare, which partners with Christian missionary doctors and Christian hospitals throughout Africa to provide clinical care for the poor, to set up infrastructure, and to do training so that Africans in this generation and in future generations will have more and easier access to always in improving healthcare. And we're also very involved with Eagle's Wings, and Eagle's Wings is what's called a parachurch ministry, and it's devoted to identifying primarily young, influential, and rising pastors, and bringing them to Israel and cultivating a love of the land of Israel, of the state of Israel, and of the Jewish people on that trip and in a community that endures following the trip. And Eagle's Wings sends as many pastors as they can afford a year on this trip, and I've been with them on the trip, and it's always moving to behold just how important this trip to Israel is for our Christian brethren. And every Tuesday at noon, I teach Torah right from the text. Because the evangelicals are not on the Parsha calendar, you could do a whole hour and only do 2 or 3 chapters and really delve in deep and just discover how interesting, instructive, and relevant basically everything in the Bible is. And it's really wonderful to be able to develop these relationships with Christians, with the foundation being our sacred text of the Torah.
I guess you can call On Eagle's Wing is like a Christian birthright of sorts, right?
It's similar. The trips, I've been on the trips, they're 12-day trips. They're young leaders in the evangelical community, and young leaders is important because as young leaders, when they get on their pulpits and they talk about Israel, they influence the people in the pews who look to them for leadership on issues of Israel and subjects like it and the Jewish people. And my wife, Erica, she spoke at a Celebrate Israel event at a church whose leader has been on Eagle's Wings trips to Israel. And I mean, there was Israeli songs from the Bima. There were Israeli flags all throughout the church. And this real love of Israel was just resonant throughout this church, and this real love of the Jewish people as well. And Erica spoke beautifully. She always does, and did it in fellowship with the Christian pastors and ministers who also spoke all about their love of Israel and love of the Jewish people, and all because of the foundation that Eagle's Wings has created.
Now, unfortunately, and I've spoken to pastors, the newer generation, the younger generation, I should say, of evangelical Christians in this country are becoming more pro-Palestinian. They're not pro-Israel. I spoke to some pastors. Some of them told me it's the influence that you have Christians going to regular secular colleges and the woke atmosphere that's affected them via Israel. Whatever the reason is, I know Eagles was important, but this is, I think, a serious problem that the next generation that's here now is not pro-Israel.
You're exactly right, and that's why Eagle's Wings is so important, because there can be, exactly as you say, and for the reasons you articulate, there can be no assumption or presumption that a young evangelical pastor is going to be pro-Israel. It's incumbent upon all of us, Jews and Christians who love Israel and love the Jewish people, to reach out to these young evangelical pastors and to bring them on a trip to Israel, where they will experience the majesty and wonder of the land. They'll love the people, which is interesting, because when you ask these pastors what was the most important part of the trip to you, they'll invariably say Shabbat dinner, in which case I'll say, we can do that at my house. But no, it's the authenticity of Shabbat dinner that draws them in, and it's the land coming to life that really calls them to love of Israel and love of the Jewish people in a lifelong fellowship. But Zev, you're exactly right. Without this kind of cultivation, young evangelical pastors are as vulnerable as young people anywhere and everywhere to falling under leftist influences that can bring them away from Israel and away from the Jewish people.
Now, you had this weekly class. You also do a Seder for evangelical Christians. How do they relate to the Seder? First of all, do you use the Haggadah, or do you use the book, The Telling?
We're going to use the Haggadah. So this is going to be on Saturday night after Shabbat. Saturday night, we're going to lead what might be the largest, Eric and I are going to lead what might be the largest Christian Seder ever. Who knows? It'll be right up there. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll be very instructive. So after Shabbat, we're going to do it, obviously a few days before the real holiday. But we're going to go through the Haggadah. And so my book, The Telling, what it does is it goes through the passages of the Haggadah, which are familiar to everyone who's been to Seders, and it really extracts the meaning of each passage to help us live the truths that are told in the Haggadah. And that's what we're going to do on Saturday night with this evangelical group. We're going to go through the Haggadah. Of course, not the whole thing. I don't think anyone should go through the whole thing, because if you go through the whole thing, Jewish or Christian, you can't go deep anywhere. So we're going to pick, I think we're going to pick 10 different parts of the Haggadah. And we're going to include a couple of songs and certainly explain the ritual foods, but really pick 10 parts of the Haggadah and explore how this is really the greatest hits of Jewish thought, and really our shared heritage of biblical truth with life lessons right in the Haggadah, ready for us to extract on Seder night and live by through the rest of the year.
No, and by the way, so I love doing the whole Haggadah. You can. The beauty is that when you have your own Seder, you can pick and choose. You can go, you spend more time in one passage,
Right.
less time in another passage. But just the whole ritual from beginning to end, I find it very meaningful and very enjoyable. And I know those that live in Israel and do one day. I happen to even like the second night better, because you're a little bit more relaxed on the second Seder than you are even on the first Seder.
Beautiful. Yeah,
So
it's such a great holiday, and it's a gift from God that we have this awesome holiday of Pesach every year soon after the spring begins.
You write in your book about gratitude. Let's look at gratitude, because one of the biggest things in Jewish tradition is gratitude.
Absolutely, and it's one of the most important ideas in the Torah, in Jewish tradition, and so of course it's in the Haggadah. And where do we see it in the Haggadah? We see it in two places in the Haggadah. One is at the end of Magid, the seemingly strange miracle counting contest, where you have several rabbis saying how many plagues, or really how many miracles can we count in the Exodus, and what can we learn from that? How can we live that truth? It's that the rabbi who wins the contest, of course, is Rabbi Akiva, and he wins with 250, teaching us that the more miracles that we can count, the better we are. The more expressions of gratitude that we can identify through the day, the happier we're going to be and the better we're going to be. So what do we learn from that? Is that as we go through the day, perhaps the day after the Seder, what's probably the first thing that we should do and keep doing throughout the day is just to identify all the things we're grateful for. And when we think about it, there are just truly an infinite number of things we're grateful for, from the incredible gift of being able to see, the gift of being able to walk, the gift of having food to eat, the gift of having the Torah to study, and friends and family to be in fellowship with. These are all gifts deserving of the greatest gratitude. And then we have Dayenu, where there are 15 steps of Dayenu, 15 verses, and we thank God for very specific things. And why didn't we just say in Dayenu, hey, God, thanks for everything? Because it teaches us how to express gratitude, that gratitude is best expressed in the specific. Dayenu teaches us that when we are grateful to somebody, how do we express it? We express it as specifically as we can. We tell them exactly what we're grateful for, and the recipient of that gratitude will be so much happier and so much more inspired to keep doing what he or she was doing to earn that gratitude.
And we express our gratitude for your joining us on this broadcast.
No, thank you.
The book, and the beauty about Jewish books is that even if it comes out years ago, it has an afterlife, right? That's
right.
Because it came out with about 2 years ago. The book is called The Telling. It's still available in Jewish bookstores, correct?
Absolutely.
It's called The Telling, How Judaism Essential Book Reveals the Meaning of Life. Our guest has been Mark Gerson, who is an entrepreneur, philanthropist, co-founder of the Gerson Lehrman Group, African Mission Healthcare, and United Hatzalah of Israel, which is a wonderful group doing saving lives in Israel. He also has a Torah column that he writes for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Thank you for joining us. When's your next book coming out?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm just so thrilled that we're now in the season of the telling, to be able to relive and retell our great freedom story, hopefully with the help of the telling, which teaches us how to extract the lessons from the Haggadah and from the Seder for Seder night and into the years to come.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.